There are things buried in the land that no amount of arrogance can uproot. My brother Jonah and I learned it the hard way on a cold October morning, standing in the middle of 60 acres of dead trees, with nothing in our pockets but a deed we barely understood and the memory of a grandfather we had never been allowed to meet. We were 22 years old. We had spent 16 of those years in a Harlan County children's home, a wide, drafty building at the edge of a soybean town, where the floors smelled of industrial pine cleaner, and the windows rattled every time a grain truck rolled past. We had each other, which was more than most of the other kids could say, but we had nothing else. No history, no people, no land. That was the story we had been told. Anyway, the story changed in September, when a letter arrived at the apartment Jonah, and I shared above a tire shop on Route 9. It came in a cream-colored envelope with the return address of a law office in Calloway, a town 60 miles south of us that we had never once had reason to visit. Inside was a single-type page informing us that our maternal grandfather, a man named Hector Dolan, had died at the age of 78 and had left us, his only living grandsons, a parcel of timberland in the eastern ridge country of Harlan County. 60 acres. No cash. No accounts. No personal property of any value. Just the land. Parcel 22B. 60 acres of timberland located on the eastern slope of Dolan Ridge, to be transferred in equal shares to Elias Dolan Ward and Jonah Dolan Ward, grandsons of Hector James Dolan. I read the letter 3 times. Jonah read it twice and then set it on the kitchen table and looked at me the way he always did when something landed between us that neither of us knew how to carry. "We have a grandfather," he said. "Had," I said. He nodded slowly. "Had." We sat with that for a while. Subscribe and tell us in the comments where you're listening from, because this story starts the way a lot of stories start, with 2 people who thought they had nothing, suddenly holding a piece of paper that said otherwise. Our mother had died when Jonah and I were 6 years old. A car accident on a county highway in January, black ice, a guardrail that gave way. She had been a single mother. There was no father on record. When the county came for us, they came for 2 boys standing in the kitchen of a rented house in our pajamas, waiting for a woman who was never going to come back through the door. Her name had been Claire Ward. Her maiden name, the paperwork later told us, had been Dolan. She was Hector Dolan's daughter, his only child, and she had left the ridge country at 18 and, from what we could piece together over the years, had never gone back. Whatever had happened between them was something she took with her when she died, and nobody at the children's home had ever thought to go looking for a grandfather in the ridge country. Or if they had, the grandfather had not responded. We did not know what to make of that. We still don't entirely. What I can tell you is that by the time we drove down to Calloway to meet with the attorney, a quiet man named Gerald Hess, who wore a brown suit and a hearing aid and seemed deeply relieved that we existed, we had spent 2 weeks thinking about a man we had never known. Hector Dolan had worked his land alone for the last 15 years of his life. He had kept cattle for a time, then let them go. He had grown some row crops before the ridge terrain made it impractical. In his later years, he had done little more than walk the property, tend the fence lines, and live quietly in a farmhouse at the foot of the ridge. Gerald Hess slid a manila folder across the desk. Inside was the deed, a county survey map showing the parcel boundaries, and a single handwritten note on rule paper. The note said, "Boys, the land knows what it is. Trust it." That was all. No explanation. No apology. No story about why we had grown up without him. Just 6 words in shaky handwriting from an old man who was already gone by the time we knew he had existed. Jonah folded the note carefully and put it in his shirt pocket. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. We signed the transfer paperwork and took the deed. Gerald Hess handed us the key to a padlock on the property gate and told us we should go take a look at what we had. His tone was careful in the way that people are careful when they're about to tell you something disappointing. "It's ridge timber," he said. "It was healthy country once, but there was some kind of dieback about 15 years ago. Most of the mature timber didn't survive it. So it's dead trees," Jonah said. Gerald Hess looked at the desk. "Mostly." We drove out the next morning in Jonah's pickup, following county roads that climbed steadily into hill country. The ridge rose before us out of flat farmland like an afterthought, tree-covered and steep-sided. Its upper reaches already bare against the gray October sky. We found a gate at the end of the gravel track and unlocked it with the padlock key. The forest began about 40 yards in. And Gerald Hess had been right. It was dead, almost entirely. Gray trunks standing like fence posts in every direction, their bark peeling in long strips. The branches overhead a tangle of bare, bleached wood. The understory was thick with fallen timber. Whole sections of hillside choked with the slow wreckage of trees that had been dying for a decade. There was no color anywhere except the pale winter sky above the ridge line and the brown of old leaves rotting underfoot. Jonah climbed out of the truck and walked slowly into the trees. He reached out and touched the bark of one of the standing trunks. The bark fell away under his hand, dry and weightless, revealing the smooth gray wood beneath. He looked at it for a long moment. "What do you think killed them?" he asked. "I don't know," I said. "Blight, maybe. Drought." He nodded. He kept walking. I followed him up the hillside, through the standing dead and the fallen timber, until we reached a high point on the ridge where the land flattened briefly before the slope continued upward. From there, you could see most of the 60 acres, a hillside of dead and dying trees, stretching in every direction. The only living things a few scrubby cedars along the southern fence line, and a stand of younger trees, no more than 10 or 15 years old, pushing up along the creek bottom at the property's edge. "Grandpa Hector walked this," Jonah said quietly. I thought of the note. "The land knows what it is." "He did," I said. We stood there for a long time. The wind moved through the bare branches above us with a sound like breathing. We had been on the property for less than an hour when we heard the truck. It came up the gravel track fast, the kind of speed that means someone who considers themselves entitled to be somewhere. It was a late model pickup, clean and black, and the man who climbed out of it moved with the particular confidence of someone who had spent a lifetime being right about things. His name, as we would shortly learn, was Dennis Falk. He was our grandfather's nephew, Hector Dolan's sister's son, which made him our first cousin once removed, which is a kind of connection that means almost nothing until there is land involved. He was perhaps 50, with a heavy build and a face that had learned over many years to arrange itself into an expression of calm authority. He looked at us with an expression that was not quite dismissal, but was practicing in that direction. "You're the Ward boys," he said. "Not a question." "We are," I said. He nodded, as if confirming something he had already known and already found troubling. "Dennis Falk. Hector was my uncle." He paused. "My mother's brother. We know who he was." Jonah said. Dennis looked across the property. "I tried to reach Gerald Hess before the transfer went through," he said. "There wasn't time. I want you to understand that I'm not here to cause problems. I just think there are some things about this situation that deserve a conversation." "What things?" I asked. He turned back to us. "This land has been in the Dolan family for 80 years. Hector's father cleared the original timber and ran cattle on the ridge country before the war. My mother grew up on this property. She and Hector were the last two Dolans, and when she passed 6 years ago, Hector promised her that the land would stay in the family." He paused on the last two words in a way that made clear he did not consider us to be the family in question. "We're Dolans," Jonah said. Dennis's expression tightened briefly. "You got the name, but you didn't know Hector. You didn't grow up on this land. You've never worked a day of it." He spread his hands in a gesture of reasonable patience. "I'm not saying you don't have a legal claim. You do. I've seen the will. What I'm saying is that there's a simpler path here that doesn't involve two young men who know nothing about ridge timber country trying to manage 60 acres they have no connection to." "What kind of simpler path?" I asked. He reached into his jacket and produced a folded document. "I'm prepared to purchase the parcel at full appraised value. I had it assessed last spring, $42,000 for the 60 acres, given the state of the timber. It's a fair price for dead forest." He offered the document to me. "You walk away with $21,000 each, and this land stays in the family, the way Hector's mother intended." I took the paper, but didn't unfold it. Jonah looked at Dennis Falk with a steadiness that I recognized. He had been looking at people that way since we were children, The kind of look that gives nothing away and takes everything in. "Well, think about it," Jonah said. Dennis nodded. "Don't think too long. I'm putting together a timber clearing operation for the spring. If you still own the property by April, you'll be in the middle of that mess whether you want to be or not." He walked back to his truck. "Gerald Hess has my number." He drove away down the gravel track. We watched the dust settle. He had it assessed. Jonah said, "Last spring," I said. Jonah turned back toward the dead forest. Hector hadn't been dead a year by last spring. We looked at each other. He was already planning. I said, "Yeah." Jonah said, he was already planning. The Falk family gathering happened 3 weeks later, and we walked into it because Gerald Hess suggested we should. There was an estate settlement meeting at the Calloway Community Center, a formal occasion for the distribution of Hector's remaining personal property, tools, furniture, livestock equipment, a small savings account that had been disbursed to cover funeral costs and outstanding debts. By the time the meeting happened, everything except the land had already been settled. But Dennis Falk had made sure that his extended family was present. There were perhaps 15 people in that room. Dennis's wife, Sharon, sat beside him with a legal pad. Their adult son, a young man named Carter who wore a press shirt in the expression of someone who had been told he is going to inherit something, sat on Dennis's other side. Various aunts, cousins, and neighbors filled the rest of the chairs. Gerald Hess sat at the front with his file folders, and Jonah and I sat at the end of the long folding table closest to the door. The meeting itself was procedural and short. Gerald Hess summarized his estate. The personal property was itemized. There was nothing for anyone to dispute. Then Dennis Falk asked to speak. He stood with the ease of a man accustomed to being listened to. He talked about the Dolan family history, about his mother and Hector, and the 80 years of continuous ownership. He talked about stewardship, his word, and the responsibility that came with land. He talked about the agreement he had proposed to us. And as he talked, he looked around the room at the assembled family members with the expression of a man who already knew the vote count. "The boys have the legal deed," he said. "Nobody's disputing that. But 60 acres of dead timber is not an inheritance. It's a liability. The tax assessment alone is going to cost them money they probably don't have." He looked at us briefly, not unkindly, in the way that a dentist looks at a patient before telling them about a tooth. "I've made a fair offer. I hope they'll take it." The room murmured. Carter Falk leaned back in his chair with his arms crossed and looked at the ceiling. Sharon Falk looked across the table at us and smiled the careful smile of someone who has already won. "It's 60 acres of dead trees," she said, with a small laugh designed to be shared. "What on earth would you do with it?" A few people in the room laughed politely. I looked at the table. I did not look at Jonah, because I didn't need to. I could feel the steadiness coming off him like heat from a stove. "We haven't decided yet," Jonah said. Dennis sat back down. The meeting ended. People filed out. Carter Falk walked past us without making eye contact. Sharon paused near the door and looked back at us with an expression that had dropped a careful smile. "The offers are going to get better," she said. "Dennis is patient, but he's not a charity." She left. Jonah and I sat alone in the emptying room. 60 acres of dead trees, he said. "That's what they think it is." I said, "Yeah." He unfolded the note from his shirt pocket and read it again. "The land knows what it is." I think Grandpa Hector was trying to tell us something. We started going to the property every weekend. Jonah bought a used chainsaw and work gloves and boots, and we began cutting the fallen timber away from the creek bottom, working our way methodically up the hillside. We were not farmers. We were not foresters. We were two young men who had grown up doing maintenance work at the children's home and then at whatever jobs we could find. Warehouse work, landscaping, seasonal labor at a grain elevator. We knew how to work. That was something nobody in the Falk family had thought to account for. The third weekend, working along the lower hillside where fallen timber was thickest, Jonah's chainsaw bit through a large fallen trunk and stopped. He pulled the blade free and looked at the cut face of the wood. "Eli," he said. I came over and looked. The interior of the trunk was wrong. The outer rings of the wood were normal, gray and dry and long dead. But toward the core, the color changed. The wood darkened to a deep charcoal, then to something approaching black, and the texture was wrong. It was smooth where it should have been fibrous, dense where deadwood should have been porous and light. Jonah put his hand against the cut face. He pressed with his thumb. The black material did not give the way wood gives. "That's not rot," he said. "No," I said. He chipped at the edge of the black core with a pocket knife. It flaked slowly, reluctantly, and what came away was dark and dense and had a faint, oily shine to it. We looked at each other. "How many of these trees are there on this property?" I said. Jonah straightened up and looked across the hillside. Hundreds of gray trunks, standing and fallen in every direction. "All of them," he said quietly. "If this story is moving you, hit the like button and turn on a bell so you never miss another story like this one." We drove directly from the property to the county extension office. The extension agent there, a woman named Ruth Baxter who had worked in Ridge Country Forestry for 30 years, listened to our description and then asked to see the fragment Jonah had chipped free. She turned it over under a desk lamp. She asked us 3 questions: what species of trees appear to be, how long they appear to have been dead, and whether there was a seasonal creek on the property. We answered yes to the creek. She put the fragment down and looked at us with an expression that was careful in a different way than Gerald Hess's careful expression. His had been the carefulness of managing disappointment. Hers was the carefulness of managing something she was not yet sure of. "This ridge country has a particular soil profile," she said. "There's an iron silicate mineral band that runs through the eastern ridges in this county. Geologists have mapped it, but most landowners don't pay it much attention." She picked up the fragment again. When a tree grows in mineral-rich soil and the root system gets consistent exposure to groundwater carrying dissolved minerals, something can happen to the wood over time. The minerals begin to replace the cellulose fibers. "Mineralization," Jonah said. She looked at him. "Where did you hear that term?" "I've been reading," he said. She nodded slowly. "That's the right word. If the trees on your property have undergone significant mineralization, the material has very different properties than ordinary timber. Ordinary dead timber on 60 acres of ridge land." She paused. "Appraised at what?" $42,000, I said. "Significantly mineralized timber on 60 acres of ridge land over an iron silicate band," she said, "is a different conversation entirely." She sent us to a geologist named Paul Morrow at the State University Extension, 2 hours north. We drove there the following Tuesday. Paul Morrow was a thin man in his 60s who had spent his career studying mineral deposits in agricultural and forested land. He agreed to come out to property. He came on a Thursday morning. He brought sampling equipment, a core drill, several collection containers, and an instrument we didn't recognize that he said measured mineral density in organic material. He worked methodically for 6 hours, moving up and down the hillside, drilling cores, collecting fragments, running his instrument readings on the cut faces of fallen timber. Late in the afternoon, he sat on a fallen log at the top of the ridge and looked at his notes for a long time. We waited. "The mineral band that runs under this property," he finally said, "is more extensive than anything in the county survey. It's been mapped on the edges, but whoever did the original survey didn't have good enough equipment to see the center." He tapped his notes. "The groundwater from the creek has been carrying dissolved iron, silica, and trace minerals through the root systems of these trees for at least 40 or 50 years. The older trees, the mature timber, absorb the highest concentrations." He looked up at us. "The dieback you see isn't actually a dieback in the conventional sense. These trees didn't die from disease or drought. What did they die from?" Jonah asked. "The mineralization process itself," Paul Morrow said. "As the mineral content in the wood increased past a certain threshold, the wood stopped functioning as living tissue. The trees stopped being trees." He paused. "What's standing on this hillside isn't dead timber. It's mineralized hardwood in a semi-petrified state." He looked at his instrument readings again. "The density and mineral composition of the wood I sampled today is," he stopped, as if deciding how to say what he was about to say, "consistent with material that the decorative hardwood and architectural materials markets would classify as premium grade." The wind moved through the bare gray branches above us. "How premium?" I asked. He set his notes down on his knee. "Properly harvested, processed, and graded? This material sells in specialized markets at anywhere from $300 to $1,200 per cubic foot. depending on quality and application. Custom furniture, architectural elements, high-end flooring, and millwork. He looked across the 60 acres. I'd need a full volumetric survey to give you accurate numbers. But if the mineralization is consistent across the property, and for what I've seen today, I believe it is, you're looking at a deposit that has not been commercially evaluated. What does that mean in dollars? Jonah said. Paul Morrow looked at him directly. It means that $42,000 is a number someone made up to get this property away from you cheaply. The hillside was quiet. I thought about Dennis Falk saying 60 acres of dead timber with the ease of someone who had already decided what a thing was worth. I thought about Sharon Falk's small laugh and Carter Falk looking at the ceiling. I thought about the room full of Falk family members nodding along with the reasonable certainty that 2 orphan boys from a children's home did not know what they had. What's the actual value? I said. Paul Morrow pulled out a calculator and spent a moment with it. He showed us a number. Jonah looked at it for a long moment. Then he reached into his shirt pocket and unfolded our grandfather's note. The land knows what it is. Trust it. He knew, Jonah said quietly. He knew the whole time. We needed to understand why Hector Dolan had never acted on what he knew. That question led us back to Gerald Hess, who led us to a county surveyor named Donald Pruitt, who had worked the ridge country for 40 years. And Donald Pruitt, after we described what Paul Morrow had found, went very quiet for a moment and then said, "Come with me." He drove us to his office and pulled a large rolled survey map from a filing cabinet. He spread it on his drafting table. The map was dated 18 years ago, and it showed the mineral band beneath the eastern ridge parcels with considerably more detail than the current county survey. "I did this survey at the request of a private party," Donald Pruitt said. "I remember the job. The party that commissioned it wanted to understand the mineral composition of several ridge parcels." He pointed to a highlighted area on the map that corresponded exactly to parcel 22B. Hector Dolan's 60 acres. This parcel had the highest concentration of the iron silicate band. Who commissioned the survey? Jonah asked. Donald Pruitt looked at the map. A company called Ridge Resources, LLC. He didn't need to say more. We already knew. We had spent 2 evenings with a county business registration database. Ridge Resources, LLC had been registered 18 years ago by 2 partners. One was an investor from out of the county. The other was Dennis Falk. 18 years ago, Dennis Falk had commissioned a geological survey of his uncle Hector's property. He had known about the mineral value of that land for nearly 2 decades. He had waited, presumably, for Hector to die. When Hector died and left the land not to the Falk family, but to 2 grandsons nobody had known existed, Dennis Falk had driven out to that property. Within days of the will, reading an offer of $42,000 and a story about family legacy and stewardship. He had known what was buried in that hillside. He had counted on us not knowing. We sat with that for a long time. He had the survey. I said, he had it for 18 years. And Hector never sold, Jonah said. Hector never sold. I looked at the survey map. Hector knew what the land was worth, and he didn't sell it to Dennis. He held it, and he waited. I thought about that. Why would an old man hold 60 acres of valuable timberland and do nothing with it for 18 years? Jonah was quiet for a moment. Then he said, because he was saving it. He reached into his shirt pocket and put the note on the table. The land knows what it is. Trust it. He couldn't find us, Jonah said, or he didn't know how, or he didn't think he had the right. But he knew what the land was worth, and he kept Dennis Falk away from it. And he waited until he was dying to make sure it went to the right people. His voice was level, but there was something underneath it. He held that land for us. For 16 years of us not knowing he existed, he held that land. We sat in Donald Pruitt's office in silence. Outside the window, the ridge country stretched south and east under a pale autumn sky, and somewhere in it, 60 acres of gray trees stood in the quiet, holding what they had always held, waiting for the people who belonged to them. We did not go to Dennis Falk. We let the law go to him instead. Gerald Hess made the first call. He was calm about it, the way calm people are when they're delivering something that cannot be argued with. He informed Dennis Falk that his clients, Jonah and Elias Ward, had commissioned a full geological assessment of parcel 22B and had also retained a land use attorney from the county seat. He informed Dennis that the assessment findings, combined with the discovery of Donald Pruitt's 18-year-old survey commissioned by Ridge Resources, LLC, raised several questions that the Ward attorney will be pursuing through appropriate channels. Then our attorney, a woman named Catherine Marsh, who had spent 20 years in agricultural property law, sent Dennis Falk a letter. The letter was precise and thorough. It outlined the geological assessment of parcel 22B, the estimated commercial value of the mineralized timber deposit, and the existence of the Ridge Resources Survey, which constituted documentary evidence that Dennis Falk had possessed detailed knowledge of the property's value at the time he made his offer to purchase. It further noted that Dennis Falk had made his offer $42,000 for what he privately knew to be a significantly more valuable property, without disclosing his knowledge of the mineral survey. It raised a legal question of whether this constituted a material misrepresentation in the context of a property offer. It also noted that Ridge Resources LLC's business registration showed the company's stated purpose as the acquisition and commercial development of mineral-bearing ridge timber land in Harlan County, and that the company had been inactive for 18 years, the period corresponding exactly to the life of Hector Dolan's ownership of parcel 22B. The letter concluded by stating that the Wards had no intention of selling the property, and that any further contact from Dennis Falk or his representatives regarding the purchase of parcel 22B should be directed to Catherine Marsh's office. We heard nothing from Dennis for 11 days. On the 12th day, Gerald Hess called to tell us that Dennis Falk had requested a meeting. We met in Catherine Marsh's conference room. Dennis came with his own attorney, a man named Briggs, who sat beside him with a yellow legal pad and wrote very little on it. Dennis himself had changed since the property and since the community center. He still sat with the posture of a man accustomed to being right. But there was something underneath it now that had not been there before, a tightness around the eyes, a careful stillness in his hands. He looked across the table at us for a moment before he spoke. "The survey," he said. "I'm going to assume you know everything about it." "We do," Jonah said. Dennis nodded once, slowly. "I had the survey done because I suspected the mineral value was there. My father had always believed the ridge properties had more in them than the timber." He paused. "When the results came back, I talked to Hector about it. That stopped me." "You talked to him?" "I told him what I had found. I offered to partner with him on a development, harvest the timber, share the proceeds." Dennis's voice was even. He said no. "Why?" A silence. He said the land wasn't his to sell. Dennis looked at the table. He said he was holding it for his daughter's boys. He paused again. "I didn't know Claire had children. Neither did anyone in the family, as far as I knew. She had left before you were born, and no one had heard from her." He lifted his eyes. "Hector said he'd been trying to find you. He had a lawyer working on it." "He never found us," Jonah said quietly. "Not in time," Dennis said. "He got sick before anything came through. He updated his will with Gerald Hess about a year before he died, putting your names in as the beneficiaries. He had Gerald doing his own search." He looked at us. "When Gerald found you, Hector had 2 weeks left." The room was quiet. I thought about our grandfather, an old man on a ridge, holding 60 acres of mineralized timber against a nephew who knew exactly what was worth, holding for 16 years for 2 grandsons he had never met, in a search that had taken most of his remaining life. "You knew what the property was worth when you made us the offer," Jonah said. "It wasn't an accusation. It was just a statement of fact, placed on the table between us." Dennis looked at him directly. "Yes." $42,000, Jonah said. Dennis's attorney shifted in his chair. Dennis held up one hand slightly, a small gesture. "Yes," he said again. The word sat there. Carter Falk was not in the room. Sharon was not in the room. The cousins and neighbors from the community center were not in the room. It was just Dennis and us, and what he had done, and what we now knew about it, and the silence in which all that settled into its proper shape. "What do you want?" Dennis asked. Jonah and I looked at each other. We had talked about this, at length, late at night in our apartment above the tire shop, with cups of coffee and Hector's note on the table between us. "We want the land," I said. "All of it. That was never up for discussion." "Understood," Dennis said. "We want the Ridge Resources Survey." Jonah said. All copies and documentation. Transferred to us. Agreed. We want you to give a written statement to Gerald Hess confirming that your offer was made with full knowledge of the mineral survey findings, and that no further claims or challenges to deed transfer will be made by you or your family. Dennis's attorney started to speak. Dennis stopped him again with that small hand gesture. Agreed, he said. We looked at him. He looked back at us, and something in his face had changed. The authority was still there, but it had lost its scaffolding. Underneath, it was something older and less certain. He loved Claire, Dennis said. Your mother. He never got over losing her. After she left, he stopped, started again. He was a quiet man. He didn't know how to go after what he'd lost. But he held that land. His voice had gone slightly rough. He held it for 30 years. We know, Jonah said. The full geological assessment confirmed what Paul Morrow had first estimated, and then exceeded it. The volumetric survey of the 60 acres took 4 weeks and involved a team of 3 geological engineers. When the final report came back, Catherine Marsh read it to us over the phone in a voice she worked to keep professional. The primary deposit of mineralized timber across the 60-acre parcel was assessed at a commercial value of between $4 and $6 million, depending on market conditions and harvest method, with secondary mineral rights in the iron silicate band beneath the property assessed as a separate and additional interest. The iron silicate band, the mineral vein that ran under parcel 22B, had not been fully mapped in the original Ridge Resources survey. What Donald Pruitt's 18-year-old survey had captured was the edge of something considerably larger. The full band, as the new engineers mapped it, extended deeper and wider beneath the ridge than anyone had previously understood. The mineral rights to that band, Catherine Marsh informed us, had been filed in the name of Hector James Dolan with the county recorder's office 31 years ago. 31 years ago, before Dennis Falk's survey, before Ridge Resources, before any of it. Our grandfather had known, not just suspected, known. He had walked his land and understood what was in it, the way that people who belong to a place understand it at a depth that outsiders never reach. He had filed the mineral rights in his own name before anyone else could think to claim them, and then he had held the land against everyone who came looking, for 31 years, while he searched for his daughter's boys. We went out to property the evening after Catherine Marsh's call. We climbed the hillside in the last of the October light, up through the gray and silver trees to the high ridge point where you could see all 60 acres spread below you. Jonah stood at the top of the ridge for a long time. He gave us a life, he said. He gave us the life he couldn't give our mother, I said. The wind came up from the creek bottom, cold and clean. The bare branches of the mineralized trees caught the last light and held it, gray and silver and something approaching gold. We built slowly, the way things are built when they matter. The commercial harvest of the mineralized timber was contracted to a specialty firm that had experience with high-value petrified and semi-petrified hardwood. A careful operation, nothing like the clearing operation Dennis Falk had mentioned. The material was extracted over 2 years, transported to a processing facility, graded, and sold into specialty architectural and decorative markets. Each piece was documented and certified. The mineral rights to the iron silicate band were leased, under careful terms negotiated by Catherine Marsh, to a geological materials company that extracted industrial-grade mineral compounds from the deeper deposit. The lease included provisions protecting the surface land from disruption, the creek from contamination, and the remaining living timber on the property from damage. We used the first proceeds to do something that neither of us had planned, but both of us recognized immediately as correct. We endowed a search program at the state's foster care agency, a program specifically designed to locate and connect orphaned or placed children with living relatives who might not know they existed. The program had a name, which we put on a small plaque outside the office door. The name was Hector Dolan Ward Memorial Search Initiative. We kept the farmhouse at the foot of the ridge. It needed work, the roof, the foundation, the porch, and we did most of that work ourselves on weekends, the way we had learned to work at the children's home, steadily and without hurry. Jonah planted a vegetable garden along the south-facing wall in the spring. I fixed the fence lines along the creek bottom. We found, in a closet in the back bedroom, a cardboard box containing 3 photographs of our mother as a young woman. Claire, perhaps 15, standing in front of the gate to the same property. Claire at 18 or 19, in what looked like a school photograph. Claire and a man we did not recognize standing by a fence post, both of them squinting into summer light. We put the photographs in frames and hung them on the farmhouse wall. Dennis Falk kept his word. He signed the written statement for Gerald Hess and transferred all Ridge Resources documentation to us. We did not hear from Carter or Sharon. The cousins and neighbors from the community center had nothing to say to us, and we had nothing to say to them. What we did hear, in the way that you hear things in small county ridge country, was that Dennis had talked to his pastor about what had happened, that he had sat in his truck one afternoon in the parking lot of the Calloway hardware store for a long time before going inside, that he had, at some point in the winter after our meeting, driven out to the Ridge property and parked at the gate for an hour before driving away. We did not reach out to him, but we did not close the door either. The land had not asked us to be cruel. It had asked us to be patient and to trust it and to hold what needed holding until it was time to let it speak. It is April now, and the first spring that Jonah and I have spent on Dolan Ridge. The harvest operation is finished for the season. The hillside is quieter than it was. Some of the standing mineralized timber has been taken, leaving clearings that let the light down to the ground in long afternoon bars. The younger trees along the creek bottom, the ones that were too small to have fully mineralized, are leafing out. They are green and loud with birds. We are going to plant those clearings. Ruth Baxter from the Extension Office has been out twice, walking the land with us, talking about what grows best on ridgeside soil with an iron silicate mineral band underneath it. She says the mineral content is exceptional for certain root crops, for certain hardwood species, for a kind of deep soil agriculture that takes patience, but produces something that cannot be produced anywhere else. She said the word exceptional, and Jonah looked at me, and we did not say anything. On the morning I am writing this, I went out before sunrise and climbed to the top of the ridge. I stood at the high point where we had stood in October, where the 60 acres spread below, and I watched the light come up over the eastern sky and touch the ridge country until it was gold. I thought about a man I never knew, an old man walking the same ground in the last years of his life, holding what he had found and waiting for the right moment to give it to the right people. I thought about two boys in a children's home with concrete floors and rattling windows, who had spent 16 years believing they had no land, no history, no people, no place. I thought about 60 acres of dead trees that were not dead at all. The land knows what it is. I am beginning to understand that we do too. Thank you for staying with us all the way to the end. Don't forget to subscribe and check out the other stories on screen right now.